Hello, it's good to be with you. I'm going to come at this a slightly different way from the previous folks. That's largely because I have never invented anything, never started a company, never made a great scientific breakthrough. I don't have a grand theory of the universe. What I want to do here, though, this afternoon, is tell you a story. That's all I want to do. I want to tell you one story with one lesson. And the story is about... I need a drone to move this thing. Here we go. Stories about these guys. Andrei Geim, Konstantin Novoselov. Andrei Geim and Konstantin Novoselov. How many of you, let's see a show of hands, how many have heard of Andrei Geim and Konstantin Novoselov? Let's see a show of hands. All right, it looks like less than half of you have heard of Andrei Geim and Konstantin Novoselov. Let me tell you about them. 18 months ago, they won the Nobel Prize in Physics. They isolated something called graphene. Now, graphene it's extraordinary. Graphene is a substance that is 1 atom thick. Okay, I mean, I can't even do it. It's 1 atom thick, and it's something like 70 or 80 times the strength of steel. Right? You think, whoa! I think I read something about that in Harry Potter. It's like it seems almost fantastical, right? So obviously, huge. Implications for materials science. It's one of the biggest breakthroughs in materials science in several generations. To show you, here's what one of their colleagues said, just to give you a sense of the awesomeness of this discovery. Here's what one of their colleagues says. If scaled up to the thickness of plastic refrigerator wrap, a sheet of graphene stretched over a coffee cup could support the weight of a truck bearing down on a pencil point. Okay, pretty good. So the story is about how did they make this breakthrough on graphene? How did they do something so extraordinary? But I'll get to that in a moment. But first, I have a question for all of you here. Just a little show of hands here. How many of you, another show of hands, how many of you have an iPad? Okay. Now, how many of you knew 3 years ago you were missing an iPad? That's actually a very serious question, because at some level, that's what disruption, which we've been talking about, is. Disruption is about giving people something they didn't know they were missing, right? That's what, I mean, people didn't know they were missing that cool vacuum cleaner. People didn't know they were missing Kickstarter. People didn't know back in 1990, I didn't know back in 1991 that I was missing a web browser. That's what disruption is, giving the world something it didn't know it was missing. To my mind, and actually, Dyson was talking about this at the same time. That's what artists do, right? We had this, in the Kickstarter conversation, we're talking about, oh, this is tech, this is art. To me, it's like, okay, maybe different species, but basically the same genus. Here's what people are, here's what they're doing. Whether it's a technologist, whether it's an inventor, whether it's an artist, they're giving people something they didn't know that they were missing. That's what artists do. And so there's a body of research on motivation that shows that certain kinds of rewards in motivation, what I call an if-then reward, if you do this, then you get that, they don't work so well for creative tasks. And other kinds of motivators work better. But let's look in particular at this question of what motivates artists. Here are people, poets give the world something it didn't know it was missing. Painters do, sculptors do, musicians do, theatrical artists do. What motivates artists? Here's one interesting study done by a woman named Teresa Amabile at Harvard Business School. A few years ago, she and some colleagues got 23 artists, painters and sculptors. 23 artists, painters and sculptors. And she had them randomly select 10 of their commissioned works and 10 of their non-commissioned works. Okay, you with me? Commissioned, non-commissioned work? All right. Not that complicated. 10 commissioned works, 10 non-commissioned works. That's 20 works of art, 23 artists, 460 works of art. paintings, works on paper, sculptures. She brings them into a room kind of like this, and she brings in a group of art experts. They don't know where these works of art came from. 460 works of art, the experts, museum curators, art historians, other artists, gallery owners. I want you to evaluate these works of art. Here's what Professor Mabile and her colleagues said. Our results were quite startling. Now, most of you probably don't read as many social science journals as I do. But for those of you who do, you will realize that this is about as exuberant as these guys get. Okay? Our results were quite startling. Here's what she said. The commissioned works were rated as significantly less creative than the non-commissioned works, yet they were not rated as different in technical quality. Let me put it, that's interesting, a few of you are nodding about that. Let me put it a little more clearly. The commissioned works and the non-commissioned works on technical quality, they were similar. They were good. Remember, these are people making a living in the fine arts. You know anybody who makes a living as a sculptor? To make a living as a sculptor, you got to be a freaking good sculptor, right? So the technical quality of the works, whether it's commissioned or non-commissioned work, is identical, not identical, similar. Similar, very, very high. But over and over again, it was the non-commissioned works that were deemed more creative. Now, this is a little bit startling because we say, well, we have to incentivize people to create. We have to incentivize people to innovate. And here, and what is a commission but an incentive? I'll give you $1,000 to do a painting. But here, when they have no incentive at all, they're doing more creative work. This is a little bit of a puzzle. So she goes back and she interviews these artists, and here's what they tell her. There are commissions and there are commissions. Here's one kind of commission. Hey, let's say, tell me your first name. Claudia? Claudia you're an artist now. Are you an artist? You can't? Oh, there you go. All right. Thank you for sitting in the front row. Claudia is an artist. You're a painter, Claudia. You're a painter, Claudia, so I can give you two different kinds of commissions. I can give you a commission, Claudia, and say, Claudia, you're a great painter. I want to have a painting of yours in my house. I'll give you $1,000. Do something amazing. That's one kind of commission. The other kind of commission that I could give to her is I could say, Claudia, I want you to do a painting for my house. I love your artwork. I'll pay you $1,000, but Claudia, here's the thing. It needs to be about yay big. I really like horses. So could I have a horse in it? That'd be awesome. I've got a green sofa, and it can't clash with that. Oh, and I need it on Tuesday. And what these artists talked about were constraints. A few constraints are fine, but once you got past a certain number of constraints, they said, it's not mine anymore. I'll do a good job, but I can't do a great job. I'll do something good because I care, because I want to do a good job, but I can't do anything that's creative and disruptive because there are too many constraints on me. Why am I mentioning this? Two reasons. One, remember, what disruption is giving the world something it didn't know it was missing. That's a very disruptive act, right? This is what artists do. And artists, this research builds on some other research, do their best work in non-commissioned conditions. Yet we have a problem, because if we go to our workplaces all over North America, there's almost no non-commissioned work. Almost everything people do on the job is commissioned work. But that's changing a little bit. Let me give you some cool examples. Let's take this company here, Atlassian. Atlassian is an Australian software company, and they do something really cool. Once a quarter, on Thursday afternoons, they say to their software developers, go work on anything you want, as long as it's not part of your regular job. For the next 24 hours, do whatever you want, however you want to do it, with whomever you want to do it. The only thing we ask is that you show what you've created to the rest of the company on Friday afternoon in this fun, freewheeling meeting. They call these things FedEx days, because you have to deliver something overnight. It turns out that this one day of intense, undiluted autonomy has led to a whole array of fixes for existing software, ideas for new products, improvements to internal processes that had otherwise never emerged. Atlassian, 361 days of commission work, 4 days of non-commission work. Let's go to Intuit. Let's not go to Intuit. Let's go to, we don't want to go to Intuit. We want to go to, we don't want that either. We want to go to Intuit. Yes, we made it to Intuit. Let's go to Intuit. Great company, very, very high-performing company. If you look at Intuit's financial performance over the last 20 years, it's actually quite spectacular. Most of you know what Intuit does. It makes software, consumer software, TurboTax, Quicken, QuickBooks. Okay, they face a challenge. You probably remember back in the old days, people would buy consumer software on platters and shrink wrap boxes, right? You remember that? Okay. I mean, you should. It was like 2 years ago. But very few people you don't buy software there's a very forward-facing crowd here. It's like looking at me like, whoa, that's a strange thing. When did that happen? But now you get it downloadable, right? And so they had to migrate their software from platters to make it downloadable, executable on computers. Woohoo, they do a great job. High fives all around. Everybody's psyched. And then they start hearing from their customers. Hey, it'd be awesome to have TurboTax on my iPad. It'd be cool to have QuickBooks on my BlackBerry. Uh-oh. They got to go put all these things on mobile devices. Intuit has had, for its engineers for a long time, something called 10% time, where people spend 10% of the time working on whatever they want. It sounds a little Woodstocky, follow your bliss, summer of love, but it's very strategic, very hard-headed. The companies that do this kind of thing, they don't sign away to the IP rights to what's created during that 10% time. So here's what the head of innovation at Intuit told me not too long ago. After our CEO declared mobile was key to our strategy, none of our business units were able to change direction on a dime. But our employees using 10% time created 7 mobile apps before any other formally funded mobile projects even got started. Yes, 90% commission, 10% non-commission. Let's go back a bit and talk about the powerful. This is not only groovy. Can we go back 2 slides, please? Go on. That one. It even applies to things that aren't software companies, even powerhouses like the Columbia Credit Union in Vancouver, Washington, which actually Andreessen told me backstage that Facebook's going to try to buy it. That's probably a securities law violation, but we'll deal with that later. It's a credit union, a tiny little credit union in Washington State. There's a young woman there named Jen Schaffner. She's a boss. She heads the customer service division at this credit union. She has 6 employees. She says to her boss, I want to do a FedEx day with my employees. Her boss says no. She says, OK, I'll do something else. And so she creates something called the Genius Hour, where 1 hour a week, she says to her staff, leave the phones, go think about a better way to serve our members. Go think about a better way for me to do our job, and I'll cover the phones for you during that hour. 39 hours of commission work, 1 hour of non-commission work, all kinds of awesome ideas coming out of that. All of this leads us back, we hope, to these guys. Andre Geim and Konstantin Vasilov. Now, they have a laboratory at the University of Manchester in the United Kingdom. They write grants to get money for research. They have papers due in journals. But at this laboratory, from its inception, thanks to Professor Geim, they have carved out time, a few hours a week, for what they call Friday evening experiments, where for a few hours every week they just try stuff. A few hours every week, usually on Friday nights, because they're physicists. A few hours every week, they just try stuff. The rules are pretty simple. 1, can't be anything you have funding for. 2, it can't be anything where you have a paper due. 3, according to Vasilov, you're allowed to do whatever you want as long as it's not boring. They made their breakthrough on graphene not in their regular work, but in their Friday evening experiments. Let's back this up for a moment. They won the Nobel Prize in Physics. All right, Nobel Prize in Physics. That's pretty good, right? If one of my kids called me up in 20 years and said, hey, Dad, I just won the Nobel Prize in Physics, I would say, not bad, right? They won the Nobel Prize in Physics for non-commissioned work. This is where the world is going, and I urge you to carve out some time for non-commissioned work. Don't go crazy, but I'm convinced that the architecture of the workplace, the work week or work time, is going to have room for non-commissioned work. But I have to offer you a warning about this. And the warning is also exemplified by Andre Geim and Konstantin Vasilov. Because Andre Geim is the only guy in history who has ever won, if we can go back one, who has ever won a Nobel Prize and an Ig Nobel Prize. You familiar with the Ig Nobel Prizes? This is for scientific research that cannot and should not be replicated. That's literally what it's called. All right, just to give you an idea, the Ig Nobel Prize in Peace awarded last year was to the mayor of Vilnius, Lithuania, who said, and I quote, "The problem of illegal luxury cars can be solved by running over them with an armored tank." The Ig Nobel Prize in Medicine was won by 3 Norwegian scientists for a paper titled, "Inhibitory spillover, increased urination urgency facilitates impulse control in unrelated domains," which by my reading of the paper says that if you have to pee really badly, you make less good decisions and your working memory suffers. What was I saying? No. He won an Ig Nobel Prize because he had a theory. He had a theory that since all living matter is made of atoms, right? All matter is made of atoms. Atoms have nuclei. Each nucleus is surrounded by electrons. Electrons don't like magnetic fields. They repel magnetic fields, right? If you put a living item in a powerful enough magnetic field, we can test this proposition. If you put a living item in a powerful magnetic field, the force of the electrons could overcome the force of gravity, and subsequently that living item could suspend in space. That was his theory. He was right. He was able to levitate a frog. Go to YouTube, look for Google levitating frog. You'll see a photograph of this poor frog going, ah, right? He was right. It was a ridiculous experiment. It solved very few problems in science. It did not advance a cause of any kind. But you know what else? And he was hooted and hollered and derided for that in front of thousands of people at the Ig Nobel Prize ceremonies. But you know what else about that levitating frog? That was also a Friday evening experiment, because that's the way it works. That's the way it works. Konstantin Novoselov says 90% of those Friday evening experiments don't work. They fail. This is what Dyson was saying just now. All right? And here's the thing. We all love to talk. Ooh, let's embrace failure. Ooh, failure is okay. Ooh, failure is an option. But you know what? We frickin' hate failure. Right? You do. You hate failure. We hate failure. I hate failure. Inside of organizations, we detest failure. We resist failure. But you know what? Failure is integrally linked to disruption. You cannot have disruption without failure. And I'm convinced that the way to allow disruption and the way to allow failure, these two things that are entangled with each other, is to carve out a sacred space for them in non-commission work. Don't fail in your commission work, okay? Don't put company money on the line. Don't mess things up. But you know what? We can create this non-commission work as a sacred space. We can do our breakthrough stuff, 90% of which isn't going to work, right? That's what Novoselov says. But 10% of it is going to be freaking awesome, right? And you can't have one without the other. So my message to you is carve out that time for non-commissioned work. Allow that failure in. Here's what Geim says. Human progress has always been driven by a sense of adventure and unconventional thinking. Which leads me to the moral of this story. The moral of this story. The moral of this story. The message of this conference. Maybe even the meaning of life is this. If you really want to disrupt the world, you have to levitate some frogs. Thanks for your time.